Welcome back to Book Break. Let's talk about dark comedy. Books that tackle pretty difficult, often very sad topics, but manage to make you laugh along the way. So I grew up reading a lot of dark comedy, everything from Roald Dahl to Evelyn Waugh, so I do have a soft spot for books that tackle sad or sometimes disturbing topics, but through comedy. So if you also want to read some books that make you laugh at some of the harder things in life, then I've got some great recommendations for you here. So starting with a classic, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This is an anti-war satire that is probably the most recommended dark comedy book. You'll find it at the top of all of the lists, but I couldn't leave it off because it is an amazing dark comedy. The Catch-22 of the title, which is of course now a famous phrase but comes from this book, is a clause that says a man can be excused from having to fly in a deadly mission if he is declared insane. However, by requesting to be relieved of having to fly in this mission, he is showing that he is sane and therefore must fly. That is about men being sent off to fly in these terrifying and deadly missions. It shouldn't be funny, but the humour that the book is written with is why the book has become so beloved. So that was a classic. That was a book that you've heard recommended 1,000 times before. Let's now go to something brand new, New Animal by Ella Baxter. This is a completely deadpan comedy about grief. Our main character, Amelia, is no stranger to death. She works in her family's funeral parlour, putting makeup on the bodies, so a pretty morbid job. She's very familiar with death, but a bereavement in her own life sends her into a tailspin, and so the book follows her over this chaotic 72 hours when she attempts to outrun her grief on a trip to Tasmania where she gets involved in the local BDSM scene. And the topics just get darker and darker. Mother for Dinner by Shalom Auslander is a dark comedy about cannibalism. Who knew that cannibals could be funny? The book is a satire about identity, so it's about a man who comes from a family of cannibal Americans. That is how they identify. He is very happy to let that tradition die out, but it is his mother's dying wish that he and his siblings should eat her. And so the book is about him reconnecting with this part of his identity. My Sister the Serial Killer is a comedy about, you guessed it, a serial killer. So this one is about two sisters, the younger one of which is very beautiful, always getting attention from boys, always getting a new boyfriend, and always murdering that boyfriend. She claims in self-defense, but her older sister isn't so sure, and yet the older sister is the one who always gets called on to come and help her clean up the crime scene, get rid of the body. That older sister is our main character, Korede. But when her younger sister starts dating the man that she, Korede, is in love with, her loyalties are torn. The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga is set over the course of 7 nights, and our main character tells the story of how he came to be a success in life, from being a servant to a philosopher to an entrepreneur to a murderer. The book is this really scathing look at corruption, but that somehow also manages to be irreverent and also endearing. Luster by Raven Leilani is a brutally funny book about a young woman just trying to survive her 20s. So Edie is the only black employee at her all-white office. She gets involved in a relationship with a man who is in a sort of open marriage. Again, this is a white couple, but they have an adopted black daughter who ends up relying on Edie for things like teaching her how to do her hair. And there is a lot of emotional complications and suffering in this book, but it's told in this really sharply funny way. Erasure by Percival Everett is a dark comedy about the publishing industry. Can't resist those as someone who works in the publishing industry. So this one is about a writer who is becoming increasingly frustrated with the limited types of books by black writers that he feels publishing houses are willing to take on. Essentially, they are only publishing books about poor black people suffering. And so he writes a parody of this kind of exploitative literature and sends it to his agent in a rage, only it is taken seriously, becomes a massive bestseller, and earns him more fame and fortune than he had ever experienced before. Anxious People by Fredrik Backman is maybe more of an emotional comedy than a dark comedy. It doesn't get dark, but it does get very sad. It's very funny. It is about an accidental hostage situation that comes about after a bank robbery gone wrong. There's a huge cast of characters in here who are all completely ridiculous and absurd, but along the way we learn about the very real sadnesses in each of their lives. So there's a lot of very moving moments throughout this book, but the humour never fades away, even throughout those more poignant scenes. And finally, a non-fiction recommendation, because true sad stories can also be told with humour. This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay is put together from Adam Kay's diaries that he wrote during his time working as a junior doctor within the NHS, working as a gynecologist, where he experienced some of the most honestly terrible, gory and heartbreaking scenes you could imagine, and yet he manages to tell these stories in such a funny way. Sometimes humour is the best way to process some of the hardest things that you've been through. I learned that from Scrubs. Before I go, one more book that's coming out this summer that I just wanted to let you know to keep your eyes out for, and that is Disorientation. So this is a campus novel about a PhD student called Ingrid Yang who is pretty much done with her dissertation. And the book is a satire about race, about tokenism. It's also a literary studies whodunit, so it's got this mystery to keep you turning the pages, and it's very, very funny. So that is one that you should pre-order for this summer. There are so many more books in this genre, so do let me know in the comments below what is your favourite dark comedy book, and I will link here to a playlist of all of our other videos about funny books in general if you are just looking for a laugh. So click through and have a browse, and I'll see you next time.